there was a famous guest. All the stories about those magnificent stars. In the beginning, he was quite rude. And from that moment, he goes, "You're an arrogant son of a, that would have been very embarrassing." I think today food has become a convenience rather than a celebration. As you get to understand what food does to the body, food is magical because of that. Food is very personal. If you don't know how to treat me, I'm going to show you. Curiosity is alive and well in my household.
Today we're here with Thaao Penghlis, your new book, Seducing Celebrities One Meal at a Time. Thaao, thank you for joining us for a conversation today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So clearly you've done a lot of work in your life. We're going to go to food and books as quickly as possible. But for those who aren't as aware as they should be, can you give us, what is the most common thing when you're at an airport or in public? What is the most common thing people remember you from?
Well, it's certainly days. There's a big Armenian contingency out there who always comes at me at the airports. But, days was, I think, in 152 markets. So especially when you're in New York and it's an international port. And also, I enjoyed when Mission was on. I certainly enjoyed that. And I think it had a large male audience because of the action and that I liked. It was interesting that kind of prepared me for the masks that I did on days. So it was, a real challenge. I mean, working in daytime, I think the biggest challenge is remembering all those lines and at least giving it some kind of conviction and taking those lines off the page. And a lot of the times, because there's too many lines, we're just on the edge. And so because I have a certain intensity, I'm able to cover. And so I think through all those years, airports probably are the biggest. I'm going to do a PA at the Grand Canyon in August. So that'll be interesting. It's a very special train ride through the Grand Canyon with just 22 fans. They're going to do this. So it's going to be a very intimate affair. So over the years, you get mixed, but you get the older people who are the real followers because, the youth today has different appetites and just like they do with food, they're not always conscious about what they're eating. Unless they're educated about it or they're raised on good food. And I think today food has become a convenience rather than a celebration.
You use wonderful words in your book. It feels almost like poetry. I'm gonna share 3 examples that I pulled out because as I read them, it filled me with warmth. But I would love to understand better about the words you chose. So food is the magic of our universe. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for me?
Well, the thing is, we've been given such diversity as far as food is concerned that we have that many choices, especially in countries that can afford food. But to me, it's once you've tasted, like I grew up like with octopus. We used to hang it on the line for 3 weeks until it dried out. There's no blood in the octopus, so therefore it doesn't rot. That was mouth-watering. I mean, some of the fruits you have in life, like mangoes and everything, I mean, it's almost like godlike, some of the foods, especially when you can appreciate in the way they're being served. Because I don't always think, it's not like eating an apple, but if you eat a mango and you slice it and then cut it up in quarters, there's a different texture to it. So the flavor and to the eye, it becomes attractive. So I think just food, I mean, when you think what you can control in your life is that, and you are blessed to have it, I think food is magical because of that.
Beautiful. I'm going to touch on one more. You discover your body's secrets by the way you feed it and how it feeds you back.
When we, in the Greek Orthodox Church, when we are at Easter, we go through a fast to the last day before we go to the church and get the bread and the wine. Um, you start to appreciate the food that you can't have because of its limitations in the religion. So, the last day you'll have, olive oil on bread with some sugar, things like that. So when you get to food and understand it, when you stop eating and cleanse your body sometimes of just juices, you become hungry. And what it does is you get to understand what food does to the body by emptying it out. And so, if you don't eat well or if you eat late, then the next day you're not going to feel great. So you get to understand what the body can take and what are the limitations to eating in what hour. If you drink too much wine, like as an actor, I don't drink very much, but if I have wine, the next day my eyes are going to show up. So it tells me something about the kidneys because the eyes are connected to the kidneys.
Mm-hmm.
So it's understanding how is the machine you've brought into life that carries your soul, how does that express itself in the best way possible? And as actors, we have a responsibility because of that body being presented on camera as a certain responsibility to the producers, to the show, and to your audience. And so you get to understand, like I would go through a 4-day fast with Beela's broth, Excelsior broth, and I would find that would cleanse me through the days. I did like a liver cleanse, which got rid of stones. So, you get to understand what the organs are, that you can do things naturally without having to take all those dreadful medicines and those pills.
Very
All we've
insightful. I
got,
love
the body is all this is all we've got. Why have I overcome certain things in my life? Well, it's always been through nutrition.
And speaking of those stories, we have you've named huge Hollywood stars like Tom Hanks, Rita Wilson, George Clooney, amazing actors, Joanna Cassidy, William Hurt. When you were, I'm assuming, I mean, your Hollywood life has been so many decades of work and amazing people. The list of people must be pages and pages long. What was the process like deciding who makes it into the book and deciding who you had to leave out?
Well, you don't like everybody you've worked with and everybody you've met. Food is very personal. In the old days, they'd serve you poison. In the French 18th century, you'd be sitting there, and if you were an enemy, they'd serve you a dish with poison. That's how they got rid of enemies. But I don't know. It's like Dame Edna, who I was best man at his wedding, which was Barry Humphries. He was very particular, and he was also a person who loved art. So he would, walk around my house looking at what kind of a collection and made his judgment on it. And the same thing with the food. He would taste it and he would give you that qualifying look that he approves. Omar Sharif was different. When I worked with him, we had champagne and caviar every day because that's the way he lived. And telling me stories of Lawrence of Arabia and many of his other films. And I think because I looked like his son, he was very taken. Not in the beginning. In the beginning, he was quite rude and quite distant. And it wasn't until I was about to start the first scene with him where he comes into the room. And when I met him, he was kind of distant, shook my hand and said hello. So when he comes into the room, he's supposed to slug me after something I say. And he says to me, by the way, please, when I hit you, do not go over this 18th century table and break it. It's very important that we are respectable about this table. And I said, oh, I'm not going anywhere. And he says, what do you mean? I said, oh, Omar, I said, if you hit me and I go flying over that table, where do you and I go for the next 4 hours? No, I said, he says, well, what will you do? I said, I'll probably adjust my tie. Well, he started to laugh, and that's how it started. And so how do you how do you infiltrate a person's personality who comes in defensive? Working with Bill Hurt in Altered States, I had some very difficult dialogue because it was very technical. How do you make it real? And so I started to do the sequence, and he says to me, "Is that how you're going to do it?" And I said, "Why? Is that how you're going to do it?" And from that moment, he goes, "You're an arrogant son of a." And I said, "So are you." So from that moment, we kind of clicked. And when we joined hands in Mexico, away from Warner Brothers, we had a good bond. And so I never stood for his star attitude. And, you have to call it. And so I don't like that kind of, when someone brings that, I go, well, leave that outside.
Doris Roberts, after dinner once, wrote you a note. And I took that idea as incredibly loving. It goes back to you saying, who do you invite to the dinner table? People you really appreciate.
Well, when I approached Doris that she would write the introduction, her comment was, "Oh, darling, why don't you do that? Because I don't know what I'm going to say." I said, "Doris, you've been coming here for dinner for years. So why can't you just get in touch with your heart and write something pleasant?" And that's what she wrote. And I think because every time she came, it's like my friends who come over always know they're going to get a good meal. I never cheap on the thing. I've seen people come in the house with daisies in their hand. I said, "Does this house look like it collects daisies?" Or they'll bring me $2 chuck. And I said, are you bringing that so I can put as a wine for the food? Because it's certainly not going on the table. And, things like that, where people are not experiencing you or contributing, and also shows you how cheap it is. And even when Doris, who used to get crates of Dom Perignon champagne free because she was connected to somebody who worked there, she would come in and she would say, "Darling, here's some Dom Perignon, put it in the fridge." I said, "Oh, okay, thank you." And I think, oh, this is a person who understands quality. And then 5 minutes later, she's sitting at a chair. She says, "Well, open the champagne for me, will you?" So I realized it wasn't for the house, it was for her. So she didn't bring anything. So I thought to myself, here's this woman who makes an enormous amount of money. I've studied with her for over 20 years with Katselis, the director. And then she would come in and sit at the table, and she would look at the flowers, and then she would look at the presentation of everything, and then she would smell the food. And so through that experience, and because she, you don't always get respect. You have to earn it, especially if it's valid. And so with her, because of my work as an actor and because of my success as an actor, and also now writing, some people will say to you, "Are you writing another book?" But they say it in such a derogatory way, whereas Doris said, "I'm so proud of you." So, Mike, you can go. I went out with Doris, just the two of us. We went to movies because she always had to have that. She was like Joan Rivers. She had to have every night filled. She couldn't stand just being on her own. So when she was invited to my home, she always remembered the presentation and the flavors of that evening.
Because you mentioned the your writing career and the books you've done and you're working on, can we talk a little bit about what was the process like this time? You mentioned the beautiful photos, and they are beautiful. You mentioned bringing it together, the cookbook idea. So from that moment to a finished copy, what did that process look like for you this time around?
Well, recipes are in my head, so I had to cook in my head. And so for 6 months, I started to think, oh, I never wrote anything down. So then I would call friends and I say, "What was your favorite meal I cooked?" And then I would say, "Oh, okay, that's good." And then I would just test my friends, and they would tell me what they liked the best. So I got all these recipes that were still in my head. And I somehow remember what I put in it. Now, let's face it, you follow a recipe. As my sister-in-law in Australia says to me, the difference between you and I as chefs is that I have to have a cookbook in front of me. You open the fridge and say, what are we going to eat? So I spent 6 months going through recipes. And then finally I said, what did my mother cook? The Greek traditional foods or the Greek desserts. And my sisters are very good at cooking desserts. So I called them and I said, send me some recipes that you do in Greek desserts that I may not have done. And so, and that was it. And then slowly I collected the foods, and then I started to make them. And as somebody said, do these recipes work? I said, I don't know. They did for me. I don't know what your idea of taste is, but it's like everybody, you've got to taste as you go along to understand that you haven't put anything in excess, or that maybe a chicken wasn't as flavorful as the one before, because they vary in taste. And so, like when I make soups, which I do a lot, I will take a whole chicken, an organic chicken, and I will cook that for 2 hours in the pot, and then I take the chicken and I give that to a friend who loves chicken meat, and that's the base for my soup, and to that I add whatever it is I'm cooking.
Impolite or a bad dinner guest. So what I'm looking for are how do we find an appropriate dinner gift, and then what would be a definite no-no, a less than great idea to bring.
People will ask me, which is kind of, when they've been here so many times, will say, well, what can we bring? Well, it's kind of a silly question because you can't bring food. So what do you bring? Wine or flowers or whatever enhances the atmosphere, but something that's not here. But sometimes when they keep asking me that, I say, bring cash. And that always throws them because they take it seriously. What? You want to bring money? I said, yes, we'll be donating to the poor or something. I don't know. So sometimes I won't answer that question. I said, surprise me, but make it expensive. I say to them. So I like to play with them. But, I said to a friend of mine once, your hands are always empty. They never spoke to me for 3 years after that. They turned around and left. There have been guests who arrived when you had a 7:00 dinner and arrive at 9:30. I'll open the door and say to them, I'm sorry, we've already had dinner. We'll talk another time. And then I close the door because I find it disrespectful. It tells you who people are. And their consciousness. I don't like unconscious people. We're going through a very difficult time in the world, and it's all because people are not conscious of others. It's always about them. And so to me, the wonderful thing about serving food and expecting something in return, something, even if it's, we used to write notes in the old days. A phone call, but texts now have become such a convenience. And I find it, why don't you just call me and tell me where I spent 2 days preparing this, that you can't afford a 5-minute phone call, but you'll text me in one sentence and that's it. So things like that, I don't approve of. I think people are, I think that kind of communication is shortchanges what, because I want to be at times where you want to cook again. If you're not going to share something about yourselves, call me the next day and say, I had such a wonderful evening. Some people think it's enough when they leave or they got here, but they don't understand, how do you complete things? Completion is very important. Just like as an actor, you have an arc in your character. It's complete. So the same thing with food. When I serve food, it's complete. I have hors d'oeuvres, I have a first course, I have the main course, and then I have dessert, and maybe some Greek coffee or tea or whatever people need, and the wines. But I just find people are unbelievable. They don't understand what it takes to put an evening together. So,
That is very true. That part,
you know,
absolutely.
the old saying
Um,
for me is, if you don't know how to treat me, I'm going to show you. So that's what I said.
there you go. The book is called Seducing Celebrities One Meal at a Time. Talking with Thaao today. And something you mentioned, you breezed over Joan Rivers for a moment, and I wanted to touch upon it because in that chapter, you help us see her in a different way than what we always think of her as. And the
Mm.
nice thing is, two paragraphs later, you're making us laugh again. The Barbara Streisand, there's a little bit of outrageousness there. Are there any outrageous moments that you didn't include that you thought about including, whether you're going to name the celebrity or not?
I don't like. I don't mind telling stories or privately telling stories, knowing that it's not going to go anywhere else. But like with Barry Humphrey's Dame Edna, there were some things there. I mean, he's gone now, sadly. That would have been very embarrassing if I mentioned them, and I wouldn't. So there's got to be a borderline, just like etiquette. If I'm expecting for people to behave a certain way, like one time there was a famous guest, which I won't mention, who was having problems with their daughter, and they were sitting around the table, and the phone rang in the middle of dinner, and he answered it. He starts screaming on the phone and telling his daughter off. And I just I got up and I said, if you don't mind, take your bloody phone call outside. We're not interested in your private business. And how rude of you, because I don't like people bringing phones into the house. And if so, turn them off. I mean, the inner chatter that goes on with people's minds where they're so distracted with life instead of just being there, being present. I just, with Telly Savalas as well, there've been times also with people with days, and I couldn't tell those stories because, firstly, I have to work with them again. And secondly, I don't think it's everybody's business, that would make it, That's why there was a book by that hustler that put out all the stories about those magnificent stars of the 40s and talked about their sexual proclivities. And I went, someone said, why would you do that to him? Why would you betray your friends that way? And it was, you smash the myth. They spent years creating a myth, and behind it is, in front of it is respectability. But when you start getting there into the nitty gritty, you make those people ordinary. And show business is not about being ordinary. And so I try to refrain from telling things that go beyond the norm. I want to be able to see these people later in some time, even though they're gone. I still believe we'll see them on the other side. That they did more good for me, than otherwise. So it's a matter of respect and keeping someone's dignity there. I don't want you to think of somebody who has spent years perfecting their craft and leaving us with a lot of things to appreciate in the future, and then decimate it. There's something, when you say something negative about another human being, the next time you see them, that human being is going to look different to you because of that criticism.
Because the book starts, in my opinion, almost like a love note or a Valentine to growing up, to your mother, to your father, to their first trip to LA, to your grandfather George's herrings and olive oil tin.
Yeah, that was something to watch. Growing up, I didn't understand it. But to see my grandfather bringing his knowledge of food from the islands of Greece, and because he was a merchant, and how he'd get tin cans and put bricks on the bottom, and then a lot of rough salt, and then putting the fish on top, and then the salt on top of that, and then the bricks again, and again and again until it reached the top, and then poured water, and then would cover it. And for 3 months, that salt would create the herring or sardines in the way and the same with olives. And so what I remember the most, even my grandmother, you'd come down in the mornings and you can smell the cinnamon toast. But at the same time, she would be dipping wicks into wax and creating candles for the church. So what I saw in my youth was to see what people who were basic, but at the same time generous, and also religious and spiritual and generous. And that's how I saw the youth. And so when we had dinners, people would bring baskets of foods and desserts. And so we'd have picnics, Greek picnics. So all that was part of the ritual. It's like the language. I spoke Greek first before I spoke English. So you appreciate the musicality in the way people present things.
The book, Seducing Celebrities One Meal at a Time. Can you give us a tease about, obviously you're promoting the book now, what's next for you as an actor, as an author? Can you give us a tease about what we're looking forward to in the future?
I just finished, I explored the Holy Families, speaking of Easter, the Holy Families escape into Egypt. I've just finished, I did a 2-week trek up and down the Nile to these sacred places. And so I've written a story, because most of the things we see about religion are postcards or lovely paintings. What do we do when we explore it within ourselves and follow those routes? Something else happens. You go beyond you go beyond the card. And so I've written a teleplay. It's very interesting the way it begins and where it begins, and how it follows through into The Great Escape. And so that I've just finished. I've written some scripts with a fellow writer, and I have a producer interested. So I'm looking to see my scripts turn into, because I like thrillers. So you write what you know. And so Days, I don't know with Days. It's all changed for me. It's not what we had. It's not the way we lived on that show. Someone else has come in and changed the format so, I'm from the school of, I like things to be presented purely. You create a family after all these years. That's the facade. You don't change it and make an ethnic family into an Anglo-Saxon, because that confuses the differentiations of different people. So Days is kind of put on the side, but what it gave me, all the journeys, so that when I went to all these cultures through all those years, I brought back with me also the idea of the food that I ate there. And so I've got a book of short stories. So we'll see. I mean, it's like curiosity is alive and well in my household.
So once again, the book is called Seducing Celebrities One Meal at a Time. And can you please let us know, where can we find more? Where can we find you? Website, social media? Where are the best places to find this book?
Well, I have the podcast, which I just finished, The Lost Treasures, which is on Spotify. That I'm very pleased with, because it was about, because in many ways I love being an archaeologist in some way, and that's why I took a lot of the journeys I did. So it really is about the Trojan horde, the Mycenaean horde, and where the Trojan War started. And the third one really is about Ulysses coming home. And so I explored that last year. So I wrote, for the last 2 years, I wrote this 4-segment podcast. And I'm now beginning to write another one.
Well, we will check out the podcast for sure. And we're going to be looking for the book everywhere books are found. We'll see you at Barnes & Noble's, at the Grove. It's been an absolute pleasure to connect with you and talk to you about family food and delicious things. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Take care.